Hey everybody, I'm finally back with another video, and in this episode we are working on this $30 washstand that I found at a local thrift store. It's solid oak wood and it's in pretty good condition. We're just gonna throw some paint and stain and we're gonna make this look a little bit nicer. And if you caught my last video, you know that I moved across the country, so I'm in my new city in Vancouver. But anyways, let's get this project started. First, we will clean the piece, then add some paint, add some stain, and add some new hardware. So let's get the project started now. Since I'm working inside now, we got to get this wrapped up with some plastic wrap and a few things to make sure that we have this paint proof and stain proof. As always, our first step is to clean up the piece, so I'm using some crud cutter and a rag, and we're just going to spray the piece down, let it sit for maybe 30 seconds, and then wipe up the crud cutter and get all the grease off. We want to make sure that grease is off our surface. It's also a good idea to remove the old hardware so we can clean up underneath, because grease can pile up under there. Since I don't have a shop vac yet, I'm going to be using this Dyson just to clean the dust on the inside and the drawers. And after that, I'm using just a wet rag, just water, and we're going to clean up the crud cutter residue on the surface, and then we're going to dry it afterwards. Now we're just going to remove this back piece here. It has a few different screws, so just take my time removing that, and we will stain this guy later on. Instead of using an electric sander, I'm going to use my carbide scraper here, and we're just going to scrape the old finish off. And it's a pretty simple process, but you just got to make sure you clean up as you go. I'm going to use 120 grit sandpaper just to start hand sanding the surface down to get rid of any remaining finish. I find the carbide scraper is always best on the top edge of the drawer like this. It gets off that finish super quickly. And I'm going to finish it off with some 240 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to hand sand it, and it's going to be nice and smooth to touch when we apply the stain and everything dries. So now I'm just going to scuff sand the entire surface so the paint will adhere as best as possible. So I'm using my 240 grit sandpaper for this as well. And as I sand, I'm using my tack cloth after just to clean up all the sand dust that's remaining. I decided to take the doors off. It's just a lot easier to sand, paint, and everything, so just take these screws off on the hinges and we're good to go. So the current wooden knob is just glued in, so we're just going to give this a little smack and pop it out. These shelves are just loose in the washstand, so I have some trouble here taking them out, but I'm just going to take them out, sand them down, and we will throw some stain on them as well. So let's do that. I'm going to be using this gel stain, Black Magic by Dixie Belle. It's a water-based gel stain, so it's a little bit different than some gel stains I've used in the past, but it's pretty simple. You don't need to throw a mask on or anything. I'm using this in my apartment, so this is simple. I'm using their applicator pad. I just throw it on the pad, throw some on the piece, and just wipe back and forth. It's a pretty simple process. And here's what it looks like after one coat of gel stain. As I was staining the drawer, I thought, hey, let's stain the top surface here that I only scuff sanded. So the drawer, I completely removed the old finish, but I think it can work on scuff sanded surfaces, but you'll have to add multiple coats. But as you can see, I have a ring here, a water ring stain that I didn't really want to deal with. So instead of trying to fix that up, I just decided, hey, let's wipe off the stain on the top, and we're just gonna paint it and not have to deal with that ring. I'm also using Silk All-in-One Mineral Paint by Dixie Belle in Deep Sea. I'm using a brush that I just found at a local hardware store, synthetic brush, and this paint here says it has a built-in primer, so we're not going to be priming the piece at all, and it also says it has a built-in top coat, but we'll deal with that stuff later. So I'm just going to be dipping my brush in, and we're going to do a few light coats of paint. So here's the process. I do think this paint glides on nicely with a brush. It does dry after, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, to the point where you'll leave big brush strokes, so you don't want to go over the same spot again. But you can, I'm sure you can use water spray or add some water to the paint to make it glide a little bit easier. But I was just testing it straight out of the can. So here's the process. A little trick that I like to follow is just my final pass through with the brush on each coat is to try to keep in line with the wood grain, and just if you keep your brush strokes all in one line, it just makes the final result look a bit smoother. Anyways, let's get started painting the top. After I stained the drawer, I cleaned the applicator pad and it was still wet, so when the applicator pad's wet, the stain absorbs into the pad, not into the wood, so I had to use a rag here instead, and a rag worked fine, as you can tell. And I didn't really care too much how these inside shelves looked. They just needed to be a bit darker, and I'm going to make everything match up. They were in pretty rough shape anyways, since the wood was just overall rough. But throwing some stain on them, I think, made them look a lot nicer on the inside. After I let everything dry, I threw on a second coat of stain. I had to use a new applicator pad because the first one was still wet after cleaning it with water, so keep that in mind. You might want to just throw that in a Ziploc baggie or something if you're going to be using that multiple times throughout the day. Now I'm using a 220 grit sanding sponge in between the coats of paint here. This is just to make the paint adhere better throughout the coats, but also it helps remove any uneven surfaces in the paint if any dust has fallen into the paint as it was drying, or if there's brush strokes that you just want to kind of sand away. It's a good way to keep your project smooth throughout. Whenever I finish sanding in between coats, I grab a tack cloth, and it just helps clean up any dust on the surface and makes it as clean as possible before we throw on another coat of paint. So here's what the first coat looks like sanded down and ready for the next coat of paint. It's a pretty thin coat, but we just want that paint to adhere as best as possible to the surface, and doing thin coats is a good way to make sure your paint sticks on well. Now onto the second coat of paint. And here's what it looks like after the second coat of paint has dried. So it's looking pretty good and the coverage is nice. But I did have a drip mark in the back corner here, so I just sand that down with 240 grit sandpaper until it's completely smooth. And we're going to throw a third coat of paint on here, so we're going to do another little scuff sanding just throughout to keep everything smooth, and we're going to throw on the third coat of paint. But this is only the second coat on the doors because I'm doing the front and the back, so it takes a bit more time. So the full piece is painted 3 coats. We're going to peel off this tape here so we have a nice clean line, and we're actually going to throw in some stain on the bottom here so we have a nice clean and stained looking surface on the bottom on the inside. So use the applicator pad and we'll just go throughout the whole bottom here. And I end up doing a third coat on the drawer face here so it's as dark and stained as I wanted it to look. So peel off the sides here for a nice clean side look on the drawers. And I forgot to do this back piece here throughout the process, so I'm just going to quickly throw this together, stain it, and make it match the drawer, and we'll throw it back on the piece of furniture. So we're getting there, we're almost done. Although this paint is all-in-one and has a built-in top coat, I'm using my tack cloth here. We're going to clean all the dust off, and we're going to actually add some furniture wax to this piece for extra protection. There's nothing wrong with throwing on some wax. So I'm using Best Dang Wax by Dixie Belle, and this is going to be applied with a white t-shirt here. Make sure it's lint-free, and just take it. I like to rub it in circles at first and then go back and forth to make it line up with the paint lines and the wood grain. So just simple process, and we'll leave it on for a few minutes and then we'll come back and buff it so it is ready to dry and cure. One thing I like about poly over wax is once you apply the poly and it dries, you can basically touch it and it won't smudge. But with wax, even after you buff it, I find touching it the next day, it kind of leaves some fingerprints. So that's not my favorite thing with wax, but hey, it's still a good way to apply over your furniture, let it cure, and it's a nice protector. And here's what the top looks like after I fully buff the top surface. I also add some wax over the stained drawer piece here, and we just throw it on and we buff it. We follow the same process, and it turned out pretty nice, I must say. And here's what the drawer looks like after it's been fully buffed. Now onto the hardware. So I'm using some gilding wax, Dixie Belle black gilding wax here. And so what I did, I just purchased new hardware. I couldn't find any black hardware that would fit the drawer as well. So I found these poles here. And what I'm gonna do is sand them down, and I'm gonna just apply gilding wax over them, a few coats to make it look vintage and black, and you'll see the process. But you need to sand them down so it gives the gilding wax just a little bit of a better surface to stick onto. So I just use a brush and dip it in the gilding wax and apply a few light coats. I also wanted to make the hinges a little bit darker, so I just added some black gilding wax over them as well, and it just made them look a little bit newer. So here's after the first coat of gilding wax on the poles. You can tell they're going to need a couple coats, but no problem. When it dries, we'll come back and we throw on the second coat. The hardware was the correct size, but the holes on the hardware were a little bit too big, so I needed to make the drawer I needed to drill the holes a little bit bigger on the drawer, so I just took out my drill and just made them a little bit bigger. So this is the only time I really needed power tools for this project, but it wasn't really a major power tool. Everyone should have a drill. I recommend having a drill. So I used some washers just to add the hardware on the drawers, and then I add the screws back on the hinges, and we're going to install the doors again. And pretty simple process. And install this new black knob that I picked up at the hardware store as well. And let's not forget to add this back piece in. Okay, finally we can throw this drawer back in. Let's take a look at this project one more time before we even touched it, just to show you the complete before and after transformation. And here is what it looks like after. I hope you guys enjoyed this furniture makeover process. I definitely felt a little bit rusty after taking a few months off, but I had a lot of fun and I can't wait to do some more projects. If you guys liked the outcome of this project, please let me know in the comments below, and please feel free to give a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on my future furniture flipping videos. I appreciate all of you guys watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.